be involved, as I mentioned before. Our academic affairs administrators are heavily engaged in that process. Our vice presidents of instruction, we actually have a vice presidents of instruction council. It is our vice president of instruction from each campus. They are represented, they have representatives or they are present at that council meeting. And so we have those discussions on what that's going to do to impact their programs. Evaluating the credit, that is probably the biggest thing I would say right now is to really get in depth on. Do not just simply say we'll do it on an individual basis. And then say that's going to be okay, we'll ride that out until the next change comes. Because the next change, as you know in education, can come in a semester, in a month. And so you want to really think at the broader spectrum of if this thing picks up, can we truly sustain taking each individual application and evaluating it on an individual basis? Realistically, is that feasible? And so it might be you do that for one type of prior learning assessment, which that's what we do for portfolio. But we can't do that for each exam that comes out. We can't do that for each licensure or certification that comes out. So you want to develop a business process and a mechanism to address new exams, new licensures or certifications. What we do is when they're brought to our attention and the student says, hey, you guys haven't assessed this, right now, at this present time, credit is not allowable. But what I do is I then take that to our curriculum team so they can look into it, and hopefully within the next semester or within the next year, they can make a determination of the equivalent course credit. So you want to have a process for if you haven't evaluated, what is going to be the means to look at evaluating it, and you want to have a process for if it is evaluated, what is going to be our business process for immediately awarding that credit. So you really want to go into depth when you talk about evaluating the credit. You also want to look at consistency of that evaluation, which is really key. Do you have a rubric? Is it just going to be the faculty looking at the documentation and saying yes? Or is there going to be a specific rubric that identifies how competent or what level of insight the student has into a certain content area? That's going to be key for a number of reasons. I can tell you firsthand, I had ACE contact me because I had a student who raised a complaint that said we didn't do a thorough evaluation. Had I not had thorough documentation of how that student did not meet the outcomes, what could I say? Other than let's evaluate it again and we apologize for the misrepresentation. So those things can come in handy. And also for SACs, when they come through and you award that credit, they want to know that you have a documentation that supports an evaluation from a content matter expert. So ineligible credit. So student comes in with 30 years of experience in business. Can they then get the small business entrepreneurship course? That's the capstone for your small business certificate. It's a question to ask yourself, either on a program level or even at an institutional level. What courses are we going to say that this is the cap? Will it be just introductory courses? Will it consist of any co-op or any clinicals? All of these things are things definitely to consider. A more recent example is we did have a student who came in with a small business, wanting small business entrepreneurship, the capstone, wanting credit for it. They said they've been in business for 20 years, they've run a small business, and the faculty member could not have said it best. They told me that is very true, they might have. But I have no indication of knowing whether or not that business was successful, whether or not they applied practice and theory into the operation of that business to demonstrate that they know all the content that's incorporated in the certificate. And that was the best answer they could have given me so that I could express to the student why that was a course that would be ineligible for credit. Nature of portfolio. Will it be electronic or will it be physical? Will they get to submit and review, or do they have to defend their thesis? What is your process? How would you like to see that done? Portfolio is something that's definitely going to be emerging. Because students are going to come with you with such an array of experience and knowledge and insight, and now they have alternative credit projects where individuals are taking courses from Straighterline and other MOOCs, and all these other things are coming together, and the Department of Education wants us to take a real good evaluation of that. Keeping those things in mind, if we were to put it in a portfolio format, how would you evaluate that? Could they submit it electronically and that'd be fine? Or do you need to see them in person to interview them? Is there an element of both, where they'll have to actually present to you their findings and what they have as documentation, But in addition, they'll have to do a narrative. There's actually that link, I won't show it for the sake of time. If we're good on time, I'll show it a little later. But just so you know, there's actually, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dance Your PhD. If you can't explain your PhD and what it's about, you can dance it. And that can be, and it's actually individuals who've won awards for really articulating what their PhD dissertation is about, and through interpretive dance. Everything from chemistry to biology. And it's amazing because I learned. For the first time, I actually learned something. So it's just amazing. There's different aspects that you can use. I wouldn't necessarily say interpretive dance is your assessment process, but I would say it might be one of the elements that you use in the assessment process. So it's just some things to keep in mind on how you're going to do your portfolio. So uniformity of content and branding. This is key for your students. And this is something I have to say that Lone Star College really struggles on. HCC mentioned that they had a grant at one point in time, and very similar to us, we had a grant for tech prep. And it kind of, we hit tech prep with PLA for high school articulation, but we're actually able to jump into some other avenues such as AP and all this and capture PLA as a whole through that grant and to market it. When that went away, the marketing really kind of took its downturn as well. And so the consistent message that's going across the system, we found there was inconsistencies, not just on the advisor standpoint, but also on the students. A lot of the students just felt like it was something you could only get if you're a veteran or if you were a high school graduate getting AP. There was no middle ground. They didn't feel like there was any other avenue. And that really has to do with the branding of your program and your marketing. If you can find a catchy slogan and make that your PLA program and let it be said across your system, that is wonderful. That is actually the aim that you want to take, because you want students to recognize that this is a program, this is an option, but that there's consistency across your system on how we evaluate this option. So that's definitely something I would keep in mind. And you want to have your marketing director, you want to have your student success or your student services individuals, because they're going to tell you what students are coming in with. I love our advising faculty and deans. They're awesome because they will tell me flat out, these are what students think about your program. And so that gives me an entryway into saying, okay, this is where we need to change because we're not really delivering the message appropriately. Applying credit to requirements. Where were your credits set? Some institutions for years have done it in elective credit only. At one point in time, we did not allow students to receive credit for towards core courses for certain types of PLA. So will you put that type of policy in place, or will you allow for students to receive credit toward any course within your degree program, just up to a certain limit of the number of courses? This is really going to be key, really, to your faculty. I would honestly say, I think it's wonderful if a student has a lot of experience in the basic nursing skills, but I'm not quite sure that I want them to have 75% of a degree through PLA. I'm just saying. So I'm thinking for my health and well-being, and for the fact they're going to walk out of here with a Lone Star College degree, I want them to be trained, taught, and know and see and visibly see with my eyes their ability and their skill. So there's going to be a measure of trying to determine what is going to be the requirements as far as where we're going to let that credit sit. Transferability. This is a good one because I've noticed in our institution we actually put on our transcripts TCR, or transfer. There's no grade attached to the PLA, but it's recorded as TCR. We don't separate it out as a separate section for PLA or identify the credit as awarded as PLA. There are two things to that. Doing so, it works well for our students because typically they can transfer into another institution. Sometimes the receiving institution, as we've informed the students, will ask for documentation that it was received through PLA or what documentation that we review. And that's fine, the students are well aware of that. But it is good to keep in mind how you put it on that transcript. It may make all the difference for the students in their transferring. You might just stipulate that this isn't for transfer, that we acknowledge that this credit is what we deem to be applicable to our courses here and for graduation here. And we've actually done that with our credit by exam. students who take any type of exam award credit, we've instructed students that that is for internal purposes. It's for internal graduation and course degree completion purposes. Fees. So the CAL program actually has a 10 measures or evaluative measures for a PLA program. I highly advise you to look at it, really just kind of gauge where you are in your program and in your policies. And in that, they actually mention fees should not exceed what it would actually take to assess the student. So you don't want this to look as though it's simply a money-making opportunity where you're charging the same amount for a course as you would for just taking an annual challenge exam. But at the same time, you do want to look at realistically, if I do a portfolio, what is the time, the cost, the effort that is put into that portfolio evaluation by our faculty for us to justify charging them $100, charging them $60. So you do want to keep that in mind. And you want to make sure that, of course, it's supporting your faculty most importantly, especially if they're going to be doing the evaluation, the time and the effort that's taken into it. You also want to look at where those fees are going to go. Are those fees going to go back to your faculty? Or is your faculty, the participation of your faculty just going to be deemed as part of their institutional service? That's a question for you all to determine and to really speak with your business office managers on how they're going to collect the fees from the student, but also to speak with your CFO on where best to funnel that money back. Does it go back into the PLA program? Or does it go into the campus assessment center where the assessments are being done? So all of these things are really something to get in depth on when it comes to looking at fee and collecting those fees. Portfolio preparation support. It is one thing to tell a student to put a collage together of all your experiences. We all know that when we have our students for the first time, we're generally kind of guiding them and shuffling them through every aspect. So imagine if you just have a student walk in and you tell them, just get together all you got and bring it. They really need the support. They truly need the support. And I can tell you from personal experience, we're having to reevaluate how we do that support. I'm actually working on building a on-demand module to support our students so that they can have that accessible to them whenever they're looking at portfolio and get an idea of how to build it and do the narrative for the portfolio. But how are you going to do that? For years, we actually had a portfolio preparation course. It was done on our continuing education side. And I'm not sure if it was just simply because of low attendance, but it was discontinued. And then at that point, it really just was a small manual that faculty used and spoke with each student individually. We weren't seeing a lot of portfolio at the time, so it really wasn't a concern. Well, then now we have this boom, and everybody has heard about PLA, and everybody wants to use a portfolio option because they don't qualify under the other. So now, how do we go about preparing those students? And that's what we're having to look at. Will you use CAL? Will you do it out-house and actually allow for a third party to do that assessment evaluation, or will you do it in-house? And do you have the infrastructure to support it? What is the business process? Because if I'm an art student and I've created this portfolio that is this size, how do I get it to the appropriate people? Who's going to coordinate that effort? And who's going to follow up with that faculty member to make sure that it's done in a feasible amount of time? So all of those mechanisms have to be in place as far as your business process when you look at looking at portfolio and the preparation and support, and making sure that's communicated to the students so they're well aware that when I submit my portfolio, I have all the things that would demonstrate I've met all the learning outcomes, I've met or did activities that address the learning objectives. They need to be sure to articulate that, whether it's a narrative or in person. Professional development. With PLA, you have various audience members. That's number one. You're having to speak with faculty who evaluate. You're having to speak with faculty that don't evaluate, but just hear about PLA. You're having to speak with dean because you're using their faculty. You're having to speak with student records because they're processing the applications for credit. You're also going to have to speak with your student services because your advisors are actually going to be the first point of contact, so they need to be consistent in the same message and knowledgeable about information. So you have some various audiences, and each one wants to hear a different type of speech. When I speak with faculty, they are not trying to hear about the application process. They want to hear about how we are making sure that these students are really doing what they said they did, and that it really does equate to content mastery in my course. So that's where the focus needs to be. Whether you use, Kel has wonderful data on the benefits that awarding PLA credit has on persistence and retention. Wonderful data on that. That might be the data you need to present to your administrators, to your deans, so that they can actually encourage faculty as they start talking about program development, that as they build a program, they build PLA as an option. One of the great, I want to say, connections we did more recently with our professional development was we were able to go to a workforce. We have a curriculum team day where our curriculum teams meet semestrally. And we were able to speak about PLA, and it was mentioned by our associate vice chancellors, and everyone really spoke about whether this would be a great opportunity for workforce. Well, in the building of a new program, the law enforcement degree decided to build PLA as a fundamental basis before they actually started the degree itself. So it allows you to have those type of opportunities, so it's in place well before the students get started. So use your professional development as ways to not only teach and update, but also to build and expand your PLA program. Tracking. This is another one that I say I suffer with so much. When we developed our program, we developed it not to track from the beginning to end, but only to track the application once it was submitted for credit. Now we're having to figure out how do we go back and track from the moment a student has an interest to the very end point. Our systems, we didn't develop it in a way where we could track from beginning to end. So now we're having to try and figure out how to use a little bit of manual labor, as well as some of our office and technology resources to try and see if we can get a real clear picture of how long it's taking for students to receive credit. Where are the gaps in time? Where is there a lapse in time? Just all of those type of things that we're trying to look at, but in order for you to improve, you really have to have a clear picture. So if you're new to building your PLA program, build it in the mindset of the future, and that if this grows, once again, how we're going to be able to track these students from beginning to end. Who's going to be that individual who does the tracking is also another thing. Will it happen at the campus level? Will it happen at the system level? So these are some avenues that you really want to keep in mind. It's also going to help you with grant writing. If you definitely want to write a grant to show how you're trying to expand, and you want to do an assessment center like Lipscomb University, how can you get there without being able to show what type of students you're touching and how many students you're reaching and how many students are getting that message? So you really want to start from scratch with your tracking record and making sure you go from beginning to end. Review and appeals process. I have shared this example before, but it's the most profound example. So once again, we had that individual that came to us with 20 years of business experience. Of course, they were distraught with the final result that our faculty came up with reviewing their portfolio. We went from using one faculty member at the campus that is designated to do so, to then having her reach out to 3 of her counterparts at other campus locations just because she wanted to make sure she wasn't showing any type of bias, to then including our entire curriculum team. That's a lot of manpower. That's a lot of people. And that's a lot of money, really, when you think about the time that your faculty are taking on one prior learning assessment application. Where are you going to stop? So you have to say to yourself, if I review this, and we've reviewed this process, we've looked at all the documentation, I have thoroughly documented how a student has not met these outcomes. At that point, will it be one review? Or will you only allow for a review to occur if there is some type of extenuating circumstance? The student didn't include appropriate documentation, or the student did not articulate whether or not they met an outcome, they missed one. You might want to put some cushion there for those opportunities, but what is going to be the business process? when will that happen? Will they just call everybody until they've made everyone upset? Or will they contact one point of contact? Will they address one individual at the campus or go back to their advisor and go through the process all over again? So you're going to really have to figure out what is going to be our policy on that, but then also what is going to be our business process for actually implementing and seeing it happen. So that involved our student services, and we're actually looking at that ourselves. I can admit to you we are looking at how to redo that policy because we've honestly had students who have gone back and forth with the faculty on a portfolio, and they've gone back and forth until they've gotten it right, or until they think they've gotten it right, and that could be a lot of time. And so we've actually had to look at where have we set parameters for students on that process. So it's involving our student services, because our advisors need to be involved because they need to be aware of what that appeal process looks like. But most importantly, it's involving our faculty, our administrative, our academic affairs administrators, and our deans especially, because they're really more knowledgeable about what time a faculty member has, what workload they have, and whether or not they can be used in such a capacity. So I really encourage you all to take some time, and as I'm not sure, I believe everyone has the worksheet. Take some time and kind of look through some of these policies or some of these encouragements or suggestions, and identify what are going to be your key resources when you contact individuals on campus. Who do you need to have sitting at the table as you're beginning to build these policies or looking at revising them? Please feel free to ask questions if there's anything that you're a little uncertain of, or if you have questions about how it's transcripted, anything of that nature. But take some time either with individuals that are at your table or with individuals that are from your institution that are present, and just look at some things that you might key in on as something that you want to take back and actually look and investigate. YouTube, you do have all these other options. So these are just things to keep in mind. So when you start looking at your assessment methods, you don't have to limit it simply to the exam. But as I said, I hope you all have an opportunity to spend some time, and if you have questions along the way as you're going through looking at these worksheets or even in discussions at your campuses, please feel free to give me a call. I'll be more than happy to assist you. And I am very happy to explain to you the woes and then the successes that we've had, because that really only helps you to advance. It truly does. But thank you.